Welcome to the BookFest Spring 2021. My name is Desireé, and right now we have a very special conversation with Dr. Michael Shermer about being a skeptic today. What's it like being a skeptic in a world full of online conspiracies, fake news, tribalism, gone to just crazy extremes nowadays, right? This conversation is going to dig into some of those topics with world-renowned skeptic and New York Times bestselling author, Dr. Michael Shermer. He's going to unravel the cost of free speech and what the average person can actually do about things like QAnon and the spread of conspiracy theories. I'm going to dig into why people believe weird things. And I also want to talk a little bit about maybe how we can help loved ones who are caught up in some of these cult-like groups. And after all, underneath everything, I really want to know, must we give the devil his due? Dr. Michael Shermer, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
In a world gone mad, we need more free speech.
Well, and really, you know, that's the thing. So this is your book, and it's been out almost a year now. April of last year it came out. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it really kind of hit the topic on the head, because there's so much going on right now in the world of, you know, conspiracy theories. QAnon is just the one that jumps to mind, but there's so much going on out there. So let's start with the very, you know, salient theme of your book. Why must we give the devil his due? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we actually have the little devil. There he is, right there. And the devil is anyone you disagree with or who disagrees with you on anything. And the reason they should be given their due is because you might be wrong. You might be completely wrong. You might be partially wrong. Maybe you're right, but you don't have very good arguments, and you can hear good arguments. And most importantly, the moment you censor the devil, whoever you're disagreeing with, you're setting up norms of censoriousness. That is, censorship of people you don't disagree with means they can silence you when they don't agree with you, when they think you're the one that's wrong. And none of us are omniscient, so all of us are capable of being wrong. And the only way to find out is to talk to other people. You can't work in isolation. You know, we just have our thoughts, and we express our thoughts through language. And you have to be able to communicate with others and explain what your position is, and then listen to them. And that's the only way to find out if you've gone off the rails or not. Now, that's true in science because even scientists are mostly wrong about their hypotheses. And so we have a system set up which involves peer review and debate and disputation and confrontation in the marketplace of ideas in the scientific community by the experts who combat each other to try to figure out what's true. But at least in science, we have the idea that there is a truth to be discovered, that is empirical truths. You can see it, and I can see it, and we can run the experiment. You can run the experiment the same way I did. You can collect your data. I'll collect my data. We'll compare them, and so forth. In politics, it's even worse, or say religion, political truths, religious truths, cultural truths. These things do not have the same opportunity that, say, scientists have of understanding that there is a reality to understand. There's a truth to be gotten. In politics, say, for example, what's the right tax rate? I don't know. You know, this state of California where I'm at, you know, we have 10% income tax. Texas has 0% income tax. Now, of course, we all have federal income tax, but this is a relevant topic because I just did my taxes this week. But there is no correct answer to be had there. It's settled. It's settled through elections and debate and confrontation and op-ed pieces and books and articles and so forth. And then we have an election, and then, you know, so that's a different kind of truth than an empirical truth. And even more so, thus, we have to have a free exchange of ideas to figure out what it is we want. And the problem, the reason that I did the book now is because things have gotten worse in terms of free speech, just in the last maybe 10 years. Just kind of winding back a bit. Recall the kind of free speech movement in Berkeley in the 60s, led by liberals. And so now it's kind of flipped. Whereas conservatives used to obsess about, rock lyrics and the flag burning and protests over the Vietnam War and so on, and that we have to silence these people. They're a threat to the nation. They're a threat to our children. But now it's the opposite. Now liberals are making the argument that, speech is violence, and we have to counter violence with censorship. And it's conservatives saying, no, we have to have free speech. And I'm like, what? When did this happen? Well, it started about 10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
That kind of censoriousness you see on the left. So, and this is my team. This is my team. I'm socially liberal. I'm not fiscally liberal, but I'm socially liberal. So I find it very distressing that liberals are arguing against free speech, and that's kind of upside down.
Yeah, it's this whole cancel culture phenomenon that's hit recently. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, which is actually a collection of different essays and things that you've written elsewhere too, but you talk about the Holocaust deniers, for example. So your position would be that if somebody wants to deny the Holocaust, they should be allowed to do that. So explain that to us, please.
Yeah, that's kind of a good test case because this is a pretty despicable movement that is denying the Holocaust. This isn't like a debate over taxes or what's the right level of immigration and that kind of thing. These guys are just wrong, and yet I still make the case that they should be given a voice. That is to say, they should be free to voice their opinions. We don't have to give them anything. So let's here at this point separate First Amendment issues, that is the government silencing people, versus just cultural censorship, just bottom up people, cancel culture or whatever. I'm arguing against both of those. I don't want the government meddling around in my business of what I can say, or you or anybody. And but I also don't want students canceling speakers or silencing them through the heckler's veto, where they make noise and you can't hear what the speaker is saying. And so forth. And so my test case is, well, Holocaust denial. Now, let's be clear. A university does not have to invite a Holocaust denier to speak at the campus. They're not required to do anything. We don't have to give them a platform. I publish a magazine called Skeptic, and back when we were covering the Holocaust deniers, they wanted to place an ad in the magazine. I said, no, I'm not taking your ad. That's not a free speech issue. If we run ads in Skeptic, they have the imprimatur of our brand that, we've fact checked what we're running here, that we endorse it, or else we're not going to run it. So I can't do that. That's not censorship. That's not First Amendment. That's nothing. The Holocaust deniers are free to publish their own newsletters, magazines, and they do. They hold their own conferences. They do. No one should stop them from doing that, but we don't have to enable them. Okay, so that's an important distinction to make. But here it's a good case study that I actually, one of the essays in there, I defend David Irving, I debunk David Irving in terms of his interpretation of World War II and the Holocaust. And yet I defended him when he got arrested in Austria, just showing up at the airport. At the airport, they scan his passport and they go, this guy, he's not allowed in our country because he's going to, what are you doing here? I'm going to give a talk. So he was arrested not for what he said. He hadn't said anything yet, just for what he was thinking, a thought crime. Okay, this is not good. This is what used to happen with fascists, or communists, right? So here in a Western liberal democracy, they're arresting somebody for just thinking a thought about, I'm thinking about going to give a speech. Okay, you're arrested. And he was jailed for this. And because in Austria, as in most European countries, Holocaust denial is a crime. A crime, a thought crime. That is really dangerous to go down that pathway. Because let's say I'm in America, and let's say I'm Canadian, because Canadians have hate crime laws similar to what they have in Europe. And let's say there's a debate about how many Native Americans died due to European colonialism starting in the 15th and particularly 16th century. Well, this is a debatable point. How many Native Americans were here? I don't know, 90 million, 100 million, 60 million, 40 million. Nobody knows for sure, but there's kind of academic debates about that. And how many died as a result of guns, germs, and steel, to use Jared Diamond's book title. Well, I don't know, maybe 90%, 80%. So, but what if I say, no, I don't think it was 50, 60 million Native Americans. I think it was 10 million. Am I now a Holocaust denier because I disagree with the number? This is the problem. The moment you set up the precedent for that, then you can expand the category to include all kinds of things. He said, well, you're just a denier. You're a climate denier. Okay, I disagree with the climate deniers. I think they're wrong, and I think I can show why they're wrong. But for gosh sakes, I wouldn't arrest them or silence them because they're deniers, like Holocaust deniers are sometimes compared to. That's just not good.
Yeah, and it's very Orwellian, and it just kind of harkens back to thoughts that we had long ago. That I don't know. For me, I thought we were past that. I thought we had gone beyond that, and I feel like the last 4 years, maybe 10 years, I just feel like our culture has just taken this giant leap backwards. And maybe that's what's scary. And when you talk about, giving everybody the ability to have free speech, I'm with you on that. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I mean, what about the false equivalency? What about that climate change denier having an equal footing on a talk show with a scientist who is advocating for climate change? And telling, the facts. The average person watching that now sees these two points of view and feels like they can pick one or the other. So explain the false equivalency phenomenon a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a great example, because I noticed that in the early 2010s, when I started looking at the climate data myself for some issues of Skeptic on this, should we be skeptical of climate change, or should we be skeptical of the climate change skeptics, right? So it wasn't clear to me until I, really looked in and said, okay, I think these climate scientists, I think they're probably right. But I would always see on these talk shows and news shows, this guy, Richard Lindzen from MIT. He's an actual climate scientist who doubts anthropogenic global warming, that is human-caused global warming. Okay, and then I started noticing he was the only one on every show. They'd have this climate scientist, that climate scientist, these guys over here, these guys over there, and always him. I thought, okay, there's something going on here. This is the only guy, right? So it's not like there's two sides of the story. Half of climate scientists think this, half of them think that. If that was the case, then there was no consensus, then I would think, okay, well, then we really don't know what's going on yet. The jury is still out, as they say. But when you have the same person over and over and over, so here's a little criticism of the news industry, I suppose. I get the journalistic principle of, having two sides to every story. So interview this person, you got to interview that person. I get that. But when there's consensus reached, you should have at least some understanding of what you're studying, what you're measuring, or what you're covering for your story, that 99% of people believe this and 1% over here, 1% whatever. It's really not equivalent. So maybe at some point as a news editor, you say, look, we're not going to have two people representing this story. It's just not that. That's just not the way it is. And so it depends. It's a case dependent. Obviously, some issues are more divisive than others. We don't know. There's lots of things in science we don't know. But that's not one of them. So but again, the government's not doing, it's not First Amendment issue. This is just kind of more of an editorial decision, which all journals and magazines, myself included, have to make those kinds of decisions. Which issues should we cover, as if it's kind of open, versus there's consensus here, and therefore let's just show why these people are wrong. This is what we do at Skeptic. We take an issue like the creationists or Holocaust deniers or whatever, and then we just list all the reasons they're wrong. The anti-vaxxers. Why are anti-vaxxers wrong about vaccines? Well, here's their 10 best arguments. Here's why they're wrong. And, at least this is what the scientists who study vaccines, this is how they counter them. And so you as a consumer can read that and go, okay, make up your own mind. So there, it's not quite the same as like giving both sides equal treatment. It's like, well, we're giving their arguments, but we're presenting why they're probably wrong. So we've kind of made a decision in that case.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about Skeptic Magazine and the way you break it down, and just using critical thinking skills, really, that, and it just kind of goes back to, it would be great if instead of teaching children what to think, just teach them how to think. Because if this started more at a fundamental level, maybe we wouldn't see quite so much conspiratorial thinking like we do today. And speaking of that, is it just me, or is there a lot more of that conspiratorial thinking happening QAnon, it seemed very fringe, even just a few years ago. And now it's a household world. And not only that, even if people haven't heard of it or have heard of it or like, that's that thing over there, I don't listen to that. But those ideas have permeated themselves into our culture. Pizzagate, and even just recently with the Suez Canal and the blockage there, and blaming Hillary Clinton and pedophile rings. It's crazy, right?
It is crazy. Yeah, it's totally crazy. And in fact, it's one of the goofiest conspiracy theories I've ever heard. And I've heard them all. But this is a good case study in what I started off talking about, different kinds of beliefs. Do Republicans, it's like 29% of Republicans say they think there might be something to the QAnon conspiracy theory. This was a poll from 2 weeks ago. Now, when somebody ticks the box that they believe it or they think there's something to it, what are they really signaling? Because in this case, they can't possibly believe that there is a satanic ring of pedophiles sacrificing children in a sex trafficking ring orchestrated by Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks and Beyonce. I mean, come on. They can't be that dumb or uneducated. I mean, Ted Cruz, he's not a dummy, right? I mean, these guys. So what are they doing when they say, yeah, I think there's something to it? They're kind of signaling a different kind of truth, that a political truth, say, we know those Democrats play dirty and we don't like the deep state, big government. We're conservatives. We're against big government. So they're kind of saying, I think it's kind of mythically true, or it's a kind of its own sort of truth that I'm signaling. Not to mention kind of virtue signaling. I am so devoted to my party that I'm willing to publicly signal that I believe in this crazy idea that no one in their right mind would believe, including me, right? So it's kind of a way of saying that this is how loyal I am to the boss and the party. And I think that's probably what we're seeing going on here. And same thing with the rigged election conspiracy theory related to that. Usually what happens when other party leaders say there's nothing to this conspiracy over here, then the rank and file tend to just drop it. They don't announce I was wrong. They just quit talking about it. That's normally what happens. So when A.G. Barr came out and said, we did a whole thing, the Justice Department investigated, no fraud. Usually that puts an end to things like that because he's a party loyalist. He was a Trump loyalist. And so usually the party would, the rank and file would go, oh, okay, well, the boss, one of the head guys said, no, all right. They usually fall into line, but that's not what happened. So this one was particularly weird. Of course, everything about the Trump years were weird, all the way back to when he won. Normally, whichever party in an election loses, they go conspiracy theories. Rigged election and this anomaly and that unusual thing and that video of the people moving around with those boxes. What was that? That's normally what happens all the way back, all elections. But then when they get in power, then they drop the whole conspiracy thing, right? Because we won. So Trump wins, and then he continues with the conspiracy theory. It was rigged. It's like, no, dude, you won. Shut up. You're not supposed to promote the rigged election theory when you won. So the whole thing was rather weird. Everything is a little bit upside down these days. So I do think it's something along those lines. The analogy I make with when I say mythically true, or it has a kind of truth to it. I was just thinking about, since we're watching the Derek Chauvin trial and the BLM movement, going back to the 90s with the OJ trial. I live here in LA, and we watched the whole thing, and everybody knows what the cops were like in the African-American community in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was pretty bad. They really mistreated blacks in LA. So when the jury voted or decided, that OJ was not guilty, everybody was stunned because it was obvious he killed his wife and her friend. Clearly, they did not plant the bloody glove. But the idea that police plant evidence to frame blacks, that has a kind of truth to it because that has happened. And the racism in the police department in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was fairly rampant. There's a good ESPN documentary series on this about the OJ. It's not really about the OJ trial. It's about what led up to it for the previous decades, going back to the 50s and post-World War II, and blacks from the South moving to Southern California, and how the whites reacted and the police. And it's terrible what was going on. And so you can kind of understand in their minds, maybe if you pushed any one of them individually, privately, they would say, yeah, he probably did it. But collectively, they're signaling there's a kind of truth to the idea that the police plant evidence against our people. So, I think it's something like that's going on with some of these conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just walk back a little bit. When you talk about 29% of Republicans polled saying that they do believe that there's something there to QAnon and these conspiracy theories, and the fact you mentioning how Trump and Republicans just kept pushing that narrative, is it also a show of force, a show of power? Is that just saying, hey, look at how many people we can get to believe what we want them to believe? Because that in itself is intimidating politically, isn't it? I mean, to think, and it's one thing to show that force to Democrats, the other side, right? But then is that also why we have so many Republicans that are on this crazy train too? Is that maybe what that is?
Yes, I think you've touched something there. That might also be going on. That is to say, it's a way of like remember when Trump said famously in early 2016 before the election, I could shoot somebody on Broadway and I wouldn't lose any followers. That's kind of his way of saying I can do anything I want. And let's see if anybody pushes back. Let's see how far I can take this. It's kind of a loyalty test, right? So again, I think that that signaling, I believe this crazy satanic cult conspiracy thing, or Hillary caused the Suez Canal ship to, just whatever crazy idea. It's kind of their way of saying, let's see how far these people will go with us on this. And if they go that far, it'll be easy to get them to vote against their economic interests and tax policies. That'll be nothing. Something like that, I think is probably going on.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, okay, you say that truth wins out when the evidence is made for all of us to see. That's your one of your fundamental things that you say in the book, right?
Well, in the long run, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. I mean, clearly, the truth doesn't always win, but in the long run, I'm reasonably confident that if the evidence is presented in a way where people don't feel threatened, they're more likely to accept it. And again, in the long run, these things do reach consensus, and and the culture makes progress. I mean, the arc of the moral universe is my other book. The moral arc. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It really does happen, even though we're kind of going through a national reckoning now with the BLM movement and the Me Too movement and so on. If you look at it, say over the last 200 years, I mean, there's never been a better time to be alive in America for a minority or a woman. Now, this is it. Which is not to say it's perfect. It's not. There's still racist cops, and there's still asshole bosses that sexually harass women in the company. This still goes on. It's never going to be zero. But compared to, say, 50 years ago, I mean, conservatives today are way more socially liberal than liberals were in the 1950s. Just think about how, Jews and women and blacks, minorities were treated in the 1950s compared to today. Gays. I mean, just look at gay marriage, how fast that happened. Even Hillary and Obama were both publicly, anyway, against same-sex marriage up until 2011. And then all of a sudden, the movement took on rapid change in 2015. The Supreme Court voted. That's it. That's the law of the land. End of story. And it's largely disappeared from the pages of gay marriage, same-sex marriage. It's largely disappeared. No one's talking about it anymore. And this is how it happens. Even conservatives will go, well, gays should get married. Well, yeah, what do I care? God loves everybody. Okay. You weren't saying that 10 years ago, but okay, we'll take it. Right. So, and so there is that kind of progress, even though, we're going through a national hand wringing over race issues now. Still, in the long run, the truth wins out, freedom wins out, I think.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Can science, in your opinion, science and religion live together harmoniously? Can those two things coexist?
Science and religion, did you say?
Science and religion, yes.
Yeah. So, well, it depends on what the issue is that you're talking about. Clearly, they can in terms of reality, because there's lots of Christians who are scientists. A lot of scientists are Christians, say, or religious. They're Jews or Buddhists or whatever. So obviously it can, because it does. I mean, Francis Collins is the head of the National Institutes of Health, and he's an evangelical, born-again Christian. He was one of the leaders of the Human Genome Project. He's a smart guy. I've met him. I know him, and he's a super nice guy, very smart. Obviously, you can do it. Now, should you? Is there any logical inconsistency there? I think there is. I think a lot of believers practice what I call logic-tight compartments. They just keep them separate. They're just like, whoop, in different hemispheres or different modules or different neural networks or whatever metaphor you want to use in the brain. They just accept the resurrection as true if you're a Christian, or not if you're a Jew. Here, I would go back to my distinguishing different kinds of truths, empirical scientific truths versus, say, religious truths. And let's use that as an example. Did someone named Jesus of Nazareth really exist? Probably. Was he crucified? Well, the Romans crucified practically everybody for almost any crime. Okay, so probably. And recall in the biblical story, anyway, the two people on either side of Jesus on their crosses were petty thieves. They were just pickpockets. So that all seems plausible. Now, next one: did he rise from the dead after 3 days? Okay, let's do kind of a Bayesian reasoning here. What are the probabilities of this being true? Well, first of all, we imply the principle, the ECRI principle, as we call it. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. How good is the evidence for the resurrection? 100 billion people have lived and died before the 7.5 billion alive now. That's what demographers estimate. 100 billion. Not one of them has come back from the dead, or maybe one if you're a Christian. So we can put a number on it. The odds of this happening are 100 billion to 1. Is the evidence commensurate with that? Is it kind of matching? Extraordinary claim? Is the evidence extraordinary for it? No, it's not even ordinary. It's not even as good as, say, Mount Vesuvius burying Pompeii. It's not even as good as the evidence we have for Caesar and other Roman figures in the same time period. It's all internal, biblically internal. And, there's no Roman scribes that described this person that they might have noticed, like, oh my God, this guy was dead, and now, oi, there he is, at 2 Jesus. Nothing like that, right? So that leads us to think it's probably not true. And then probably in the most extreme version of these kind of religious truths is Jesus died for your sins. Okay, there's no experiment, there's no set of arguments, there's no data, nothing. This is just a religious truth, a dogma, just an element of the Christian religion. You either accept or you don't. If you don't, there's no point in being a Christian. You should just be a Jew. And in fact, I like to make this point because I've debated theists on a lot of different topics, one of which is the resurrection. And they have their arguments. Here's the 10 arguments, and here's why I think it happened, and so on. Okay, if these arguments are so good, why don't Jews accept them? Why don't Muslims accept them? I mean, they accept the same book. They believe in the same God as you do. They read the same book, at least the Old Testament, as you do. And, it's the God of Abraham and on, and the prophecies. They don't accept Christ as the Savior. Why not? Why is he not the Messiah? And Jews will give you a good answer. I know, because I ask them all the time. They go, well, here's why we don't accept Jesus. He's not the kind of Messiah that the Old Testament prophesies would come at this time, and he still hasn't come yet, but he's going to come. Anyway, so again, to in terms of how science works or how reliable knowledge is established, if the experts in a field, look at the same arguments and the same information and don't agree, and you can't accuse Jewish rabbis or Muslim imams of not understanding the arguments, or if they only knew the information we know, they'd accept it and become Christians. No. They know the arguments. They just don't accept it. So here I would step back and say, and that's because these are different kinds of religious truths, and you just accept it or you don't. There's no argument. It's just, that's what I believe this because I'm that.
I've always wondered, if God exists, why did she or he give me an intelligent mind and the ability to reason and absolutely no evidence and then say that if I don't have faith, then I'm damned to hell. That seems like a pretty vengeful and evil God to me.
Yeah. Yes, well, that's another issue. Yeah, for sure. First of all, the problem of evil is a serious one, I think, for anyone in religion. But yeah, what kind of God would do that? I mean, the Lord our God is a jealous God. This is the first commandment. He's a jealous God. Jealous. I know people that have gotten over jealousy. I mean, that's such a human trait. He's angry. He's angry. What? I mean, these are like the Greek gods. The Greeks had all kinds of gods, and these gods were, they were sexual, they were loving, they were jealous, they were angry, they got pissed off, they punished people. It's like that's a very anthropomorphic kind of religion. They're just like us, except they got bigger, more power. They got more bandwidth in their internet. If you think of an omniscient being, aren't they supposed to be like, above jealousy and anger and all that kind of stuff? Anyway, yes, I have the same problem with that.
Yeah. Well, and I said a word intentionally there. So, and you totally took it. So what is evil? Do you believe that evil is a thing? Describe your thoughts on evil.
Yes. Well, I also wrote a book on that. It's called The Science. Here, I'll give it to you. The Science of Good and Evil. Yeah. Well, okay. So theologically speaking, my first criticism is theologians tend to think of it as a reified thing, like it's floating out there in the ether. It's like a Platonic archetype. It's, like the way George W. Bush used it, the evil doers. There's evil in the world, and we're going to rid the world of evil. Okay, this is nonsensical. This is just a theological idea. There's no evil floating around in the ether. People do bad things, and we want to stop them from doing bad things. And most people can be rehabilitated or corrected, or, rogue states can be brought into control. Hopefully not militarily, but sometimes you have to use the military and so on. There are 1% to 3% of psychopaths who just don't seem to care. They don't feel any guilt or shame over harming other people. Okay, well, if they commit crimes, we just got to lock them up and don't ever let them out, because they probably can't be rehabilitated. That appears to be the case for some pedophilia. It doesn't appear there's any treatments that we have now that can change that, so you can thus let them out in kind of a restorative justice method that that we're kind of moving toward, which is good. But that would be the closest to evil, I would say. It's just kind of operationally defined by what people do. I mean, you could just take the worst case scenario, the type specimen, Hitler. Well, but if you treat Hitler like he's some demonic force that can't be understood, you're making a big mistake. We can understand why Hitler did what he did, and in fact, if we don't, then we're in trouble, because we need to know what's going on to recognize the next one that comes along, so we can prevent it before it happens. Right. And I know a lot about this particular subject, and I've talked to a lot of World War II historians about this. There's a consensus now that no Hitler, no Holocaust, no Hitler, no World War II. That most of the German military leaders, all the way up to the generals and the field marshals and the admirals, they did not want war, because they knew they were not ready, and they knew if they went against the entire West and Russia, that you can't win a two-front war like that. They knew that. But the boss says we got to do it, and then he sends people off to the gulag, in this case the KL system, concentration camp system, or demotes you, or you're out of the circle. So they just had to go along with it. And I think the entire world would have been different had Hitler taken up painting, continued his painting career instead of gone into politics. And but see, even there, I call this the principle of interchangeable perspectives. You got to be able to put yourself in someone else's mind to try to figure out why they did what they did, including evil people like Osama bin Laden. Why 9/11? Why did that happen? Well, Bush said, they hate our freedoms. Okay, that's not an explanation. That isn't why they did that. And we're never going to understand it to prevent it if we take that kind of theological path. They just hate people. No, that isn't why. Even Hitler had a perspective, that the terrible loss to the Germans in World War II, even though no Allied soldiers ever got on German territory, right? So they got screwed in the Treaty of Versailles, and a lot of Germans, even before Hitler came to power, were very resentful of that. We have to pay war reparations. We didn't even lose. we just gave up because it was going nowhere. And then they graft in the ever-present anti-Semitism. Well, the Jews must have done this, the bankers and, the intellectuals and so on. And that led to the stab in the back conspiracy theory, which itself is kind of a derivative of earlier conspiracy theory of the fake protocols of the learned elders of Zion out of Russia. Fake document that, the Jews were plotting to take over the world. This was like in early 1900s. So Hitler grafted onto that, and then fed the populace that conspiracy theory, and then we know what that led to. So, but again, that he had a perspective. That was his perspective. To whatever extent he was personally anti-Semitic, obviously quite a bit. To what extent were the normal German people exterminationist in their beliefs? I think most of them probably were not. Like the generals, they didn't want to go that far. There was plenty of anti-Semitism to go around. They were only too happy to see the Jews, sent out of Germany, say. But the idea of camps, exterminationist camps, there's a reason why there were no massive death camps in Germany. They were all in Poland and other countries, but mostly Poland. The big six ones, the six of them: Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka, Sobibor, and so on. Those were, far from the prying eyes of the German people and press. And Hitler figured that out in the 30s when he started euthanizing, first sterilizing and then euthanizing his own people. They were doing this to German citizens who were mentally retarded, physically handicapped, and then, just anybody who didn't pull the political line. They first sterilized them and then euthanized them. Well, this got a lot of bad press, and the German Protestants and Catholic churches were speaking out against this. So Hitler said, "Okay, we're gonna do this in secret. Don't tell anybody. Don't ever put this in writing." So this, and this counters the idea, well, where's the order from Hitler to do all these terrible things? There's no written order because they figured out in the 30s, don't write this down. We're just going to do this. We're just going to kind of wink, wink. We know what the boss wants. This is called working toward the Führer. Anyway, that's kind of how it works. I'm kind of going on and on here, but you got
and I want to dig into that because it reminds me of the Grand Inquisitor. It reminds me of this concept that people want to be led. They want to be sheep, that there's only so many people that can really be in power. And in this case, Dostoevsky, the Grand Inquisitor, was basically saying, hey, Jesus Christ, you got it all wrong. We need to control the masses. And it kind of seems like the masses want to be controlled. They want to believe weird things. I'll set you up to, talk about your other book too. Why do people fall for this? Why do they go along with it? Why do they believe this BS?
Yeah, I think those are two separate questions, Desireé. Why do people believe something versus kind of more of a social hierarchical thing? Why did they go along with it? Although they are obviously intertwined for sure. Well, we are a hierarchical social primate species, right? And this begins early in youth with, you just respect your parents. What do you know? You need kind of an authority like a parent figure to get you into adulthood. And so it's easy to go from there to like family structure. Some political scientists talk about, the kind of metaphor of the family of the nation. George Lakoff has a great book on this, on moral, he called Moral Politics, that, liberal and conservatives have two very different metaphors for the nation as a family. That is, conservatives, it's kind of a strict father family metaphor of what the nation should do. We need a strong leader to provide structure and rules for the children, to grow them up and guide them into adulthood. That's why we shouldn't coddle them. Don't give them welfare. Don't just strict rules and teach discipline. And according to Lakoff, liberals have more of a kind of a nurturing mother family structure metaphor for the nation. The nation's job, the president's job, Congress, and so on, is to nurture the citizens into adulthood, to be responsible by helping them, giving them a hand, pulling them up, helping the poor and the needy and the mentally retarded and so on. We need to take care of them. That's kind of a motherly thing to do. Well, anyway, it's a metaphor, but it's a way of thinking about human society as a structure we do need a Leviathan. This is called the Leviathan theory from Thomas Hobbes. That without that, we kind of live in a state of nature that is kind of anarchy and lawlessness and chaos and disorder and riots and all kinds of things. We need rules, and we need somebody to enforce the rules. Max Weber famously defined the government as an institution with a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. You need military, you need police, you need laws, and the government is the one where, as a social contract, we as voting citizens decide, okay, we're turning over the keys to the riflery box to you guys. You have the guns. Now, of course, in the United States, we have the Second Amendment, so we get to have guns too. But ultimately, the government has the final say on these things. Just try not paying your taxes ever and see what happens. Yeah. Now, the gun's not going to come out right away, but ultimately, if you do nothing, if you never respond, there are these isolationists, like in Waco and Ruby Ridge, they just don't obey the rules, and eventually, the government sends armed men to your house. Okay. Well, it's kind of a long way around to answer your question. I think there is a sense that, we recognize we need some kind of structure, and we need somebody in charge. Now, the American experiment is special because we recognize that having one person in charge is very dangerous. So, division of powers, Congress and 2/3 have to vote to make a major change, and on and on and on. And there's good reasons for that, because that social structure can break down quickly if you don't have the right balance there.
Yeah. And I think maybe that was the wake-up call that a lot of us saw. We didn't realize how fragile what we have is. We've almost become a little bit too comfortable. I want to ask you, how did you become a skeptic?
Yeah.
You're almost synonymous with the word skeptic. I mean, you start typing that into Google, and here comes your magazine, and here comes you. Was there a moment? How did that happen?
Really? That's good. I haven't done that in a long time. I'm glad to hear that. Well, I was always interested in science. Just my first year of college. But I was religious at the time. I was actually a born again evangelical Christian. I went to Pepperdine University and Church of Christ school, and then I went to graduate school, and eventually, after about 7 years, I became an atheist or agnostic or whatever, just a non-believer. But I was always interested in the God question, free will, the problem of evil, determinism, and political philosophy. I was big ideas I was always interested in. So it didn't really matter that I shifted to be an atheist. I'm still interested in those big topics. And then so I ended up majoring in psychology and experimental psych, and then history of science. And all along the way, I was still kind of following along these hot button issues. Like in the 80s, it was the whole evolution creationism issue. I followed that closely and published some papers on it. And then when we started the magazine in 1992, Skeptic Magazine, this was perfect for me because I could bounce around from idea to idea, whatever is a hot topic that is debatable or it's controversial or whatever. And it's often called fringe, but most of the topics we cover, they're not really fringy, because you can find a lot of people that believe in most of them, even the stuff like UFOs or aliens or Bigfoot. These are important to a lot of people. And in any case, they kind of tap into the bigger question of, well, if Bigfoot isn't real, how do you know what is real? I mean, how do you guys figure out the truth in science? Okay, well, there's a whole division of philosophy, the philosophy of science, that deals with that. So I get to play in that. So for me, being a skeptic was kind of finding a niche market for what we do. That is, the tools of thinking skeptically about UFOs or Bigfoot are no different than talking about, do vaccines cause autism? Is global warming real? Just pick your topic. Is cigarette smoking or it's different diets, and do they lead to cancer? And does red meat cause cancer? These are super important. I mean, these are massively important topics, and then you can go from there to, well, should we be skeptical about some political issues? What about abortion? Can science ever resolve the abortion issue? I think probably not. Because at some point you just have conflicting rights, and what's the basis of rights in the first place? Here you have the rights of the fetus versus the rights of the mother, and that may never be resolved. So you end up with this kind of 50-50 split, and then it's decided legally, through constitutional amendments and, Supreme Court decisions and things like that, which is why those have become, epic battles every time we have a Supreme Court nominee. And this is why, right? So for me, any topic is open. So I like that because it allows me to keep my mind sharp and stay relevant.
Absolutely. Now, have you ever had an experience, something that maybe, just maybe, made you think that there is something in the universe, is something mystical? Maybe, just maybe.
Oh, for sure. Yes, Desireé. Yeah. I mean, I'm not omniscient either. There's a lot we don't know. There's to channel my inner Donald Rumsfeld, there's the known knowns, the things we know, then there's the known unknowns, the things we know that we don't know, but there's also the unknown unknowns, the things we don't even know that we don't know. And, here science is really only a couple centuries old. And, the search for reliable knowledge is, barely older than that, maybe sort of early modern philosophy. So, yes, there's, it's entirely possible that if it came back in 1,000 years from now, we'd look back at the 21st century and think, what were these people thinking? I mean, they believe these crazy ideas, and just like we do, to the Middle Ages and the burning of women as witches, because they cavorted with demons in the middle of the night, and that caused, plagues and storms. And what? This is insane. But they're going to look back at it, hey, they believe this QAnon thing, it's something like that. So, but in terms of, I know you're kind of leaning toward the God question. Yes, it's entirely possible there's a God, or something like that, an omniscient being that's capable of creating life and shaping planets and solar systems, and maybe even creating universes out of collapsing black holes. It's just kind of an engineering problem in a way. And, a sufficiently advanced intelligence should be able to do those kinds of things if they have the right technology. So to me, if we ever discovered God, it would be something like a super advanced artificial intelligence or extraterrestrial intelligence of some kind that's capable of doing this. Of course, that's not what most people think of when they think of God. They mean a personal being that knows about me, cares about me, listens to my prayers. That's a different kind of concept of a deity that I think belongs in that bin of religious truths that can't be proven or disproven. They just are. You just believe it or you don't.
Yeah. What about, I want to just bring your book up again. Do you have any suggestions or advice? I mean, do you recommend your book for Aunt Mary and Cousin Joe that are down that QAnon rabbit hole? How can we, or should we? Is it up to us to reach them? What are your thoughts?
Well, yes, I haven't. I had an Aunt Mary, actually. It's funny you use that example. But she wasn't into QAnon or conspiracy theories. But, well, okay, so it's kind of a strategic issue. How do you talk to, your crazy cousin at the Thanksgiving dinner when they bring up, QAnon? Well, first of all, you got to be respectful. You got to listen. You got to pay attention. There's kind of a series of rules you can apply, steel man the other person's argument. That is to say, repeat in your own words what you think they just said. Do I understand you correctly that you think there's a satanic cult of pedophiles that are drinking the blood of children? Is this what you believe? Maybe they'll go, well, not quite that, maybe they'll say something. But if they say, yeah, that's what I believe, then you might ask, well, why do you think that's true? Just kind of be a Columbo, I just have a couple questions. You're like, where did you read that? Oh, I read it on the internet, the interweb, the Google. But again, don't make jokes like that. Just say, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that would be incredible if that was true. I just wonder if it is. What the strategy is to be respectful, look the person in the eye, like I'm listening to you, nod, pay attention. A lot of times when people are conversing, they're not listening. They're just waiting for a pause so they can jump in and say what they want to say. Can't do that. You got to pay attention and then repeat what you think they just said so that they know that you're listening. And that makes them feel respected, because everybody wants to feel respected. Leave emotions out of it. Don't attack the person. Just talk about the ideas. No ad hominem, as it's called. Don't attack the person, and especially no ad Hitlerum. The moment you accuse somebody of being Hitler, or that's what the Nazis believe, conversation's over. This person's not going to be listening to you anymore. So you gotta keep emotions out of it, and especially don't make them feel like they have to give up some foundational belief. A lot of people, they define themselves by their political party or their religion or some economic ideology or some principle of freedom, or their guns are proxies for freedom and individual autonomy. And, if you're tapping a topic that is associated with some foundational belief, you can't expect them, you're just going to give that up. They're not going to give that up. No one wants to give up their foundational beliefs, because then their world will crumble, right? So you have to kind of do an end run around that and say, okay, I just want to talk about this one little thing right here. You can keep your guns and Jesus and what your free market capital, whatever it is you believe, keep it. But I just want to talk about this one thing right here, so they don't have to say, well, if I concede, then it's over for me. Right? So I think that's kind of the way to go.
Have you ever had somebody that you turned around? Somebody that reached out and said, I read your book and you changed my perspective, or anybody in a dialogue?
All the time. I get letters all the time about this. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, all the time, every day. But, I don't have a database of I talked to 100,000 people and 40,000 said I would change their mind and the others didn't. I don't have anything like that. I mean, we have surveys and studies about beliefs in the paranormal, the supernatural, superstitions, things like that. The numbers depressingly haven't changed much over the last 50 years, although the topics change. They kind of go in and out of fashion. So I think of it like we're after the undecided voters, the people that are not hardcore flat earthers or whatever, but the people that have heard some argument, I heard this thing about Bigfoot or aliens, or didn't the Navy or the Pentagon have some videos that were really spooky and weird? Yeah. Okay. So, those are the kind of people we're trying to reach. Yeah, they do. It's super interesting. And here's how we think about that. All right. Those are the people we're reaching, the people that have not inculcated that particular belief into their defining worldview, because then they can give it up without any consequences.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Dr. Michael Shermer, author of Giving the Devil His Due, here on the BookFest, spring 2021. Before we leave, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else that you want to say?
Yeah, I guess I would just say keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out and you believe everything. So be skeptical, but don't be dogmatically skeptical.
I love it. Excellent. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate you. And this is a must-read book. And as you can see, I've marked it up considerably already. Thank you again for being here today.